He stood holding her head between his hands. Then, slipping one arm swiftly about her body and drawing her towards him, he said softly, "Greta, dear, what are you thinking about?" She did not answer nor yield wholly to his arm. He said again softly, "Tell me what it is, Greta. I think I know what is the matter. Do I know?" She did not answer at once. Then she said, in an outburst of tears, "Oh, I am thinking about that song, The Lass of Aughrim." She broke loose from him and ran to the bed, and throwing her arms across the bed rail, hid her face. "What about that song? Why does that make you cry?" "I am thinking about a person long ago who used to sing that song. It was a young boy I used to know named Michael Fury. He used to sing that song, The Lass of Aughrim. He was very delicate. I suppose you were in love with this Michael Fury, Greta?" "I was great with him at that time." Her voice was veiled and sad. Gabriel, feeling now how vain it would be to try to lead her whither he had purposed, caressed one of her hands and said also sadly, "And what did he die of so young, Greta? Consumption, was it?" "I think he died for me." A vague terror seized Gabriel at this answer, as if at that hour, when he had hoped to triumph, some impalpable and vindictive being was coming against him, gathering forces against him in its vague world. "It was winter," she said, "about the beginning of the winter, when I was going to leave my grandmother's and come up here to the convent. And he was ill at the time in his lodgings in Galway, and wouldn't be let out. And his people in Oughterard were written to. He was in decline, they said, or something like that. I never knew rightly." She paused for a moment and sighed. "Poor fellow. He was very fond of me. He was such a gentle boy. We used to go out together, walking, you know, Gabriel, like the way they do in the country. He was going to study singing only for his health. He had a very good voice, poor Michael Fury. And then, when it came time for me to leave Galway and come up to the convent, he was much worse, and I wouldn't be let see him. And the night before I left, I was in my grandmother's house in Nuns Island, packing up, and I heard gravel thrown up against the window. The window was so wet I couldn't see, so I ran downstairs as I was and slipped out the back into the garden, and there was the poor fellow at the end of the garden, shivering. I could see his eyes so well, so well. He was standing at the end of the wall where there was a tree. And when I was only a week in the convent, he died. And he was buried in Oughterard, where his people came from. Oh, the day I heard that he was dead." She stopped, choking with sobs and overcome by emotion, flung herself face downward on the bed, sobbing in the quilt. Gabriel held her hand for a moment longer, irresolutely, and then, shy of intruding on her grief, let it fall gently and walked quietly to the window. She was fast asleep. Gabriel, leaning on his elbow, looked for a few moments unresentfully on her tangled hair and half-opened mouth, listening to her deep-drawn breath. So, she had had that romance in her life. A man had died for her sake. It hardly pained him now to think how poor a part he, her husband, had played in her life. He watched her while she slept as though he and she had never lived together as man and wife. His curious eyes rested long upon her face and on her hair. And as he thought of what she must have been then, in that time of her first girlish beauty, his eyes moved to the chair over which she had thrown some of her clothes. A petticoat string dangled to the floor. One boot stood upright, its limp upper fallen down. The fellow of it lay upon its side. Poor Aunt Julia. She, too, would soon be a shade. He had caught that haggard look upon her face for a moment when she was singing a raid for the bridal. One by one they are all becoming shades. Better pass boldly into that other world, in the full glory of some passion, and fade and wither dismally with age. He thought of how she who lay beside him had locked in her heart for so many years that image of her lover's eyes, when he had told her that he did not wish to live. Generous tears filled Gabriel's eyes. He had never felt like that himself towards any woman, but he knew that such a feeling must be love. A few light taps upon the pane made him turn to the window. It had begun to snow again. He watched sleepily the flakes, silver and dark, falling obliquely against the lamplight. The time had come for him to set out on his journey westward. Yes, the newspapers were right. Snow was general all over Ireland. It was falling on every part of the dark central plain, on the treeless hills, falling softly upon the bog of Ellen, and farther westward, softly falling into the dark, mutinous Shannon waves. It was falling, too, upon every part of the lonely churchyard on the hill where Michael Fury lay buried. It lay thickly drifted on the crooked crosses and headstones, on the spears of the little gate, on the barren thorns. His soul swooned slowly as he heard the snow falling faintly throughout the universe, and faintly falling like the descent of their last end upon all the living and the dead.